time. Two of you have agreed to review chapters this morning with us, Barb, Chris, Cynthia, and Janet. So thank you for agreeing to do that. And so we're going to take just a few minutes each, like you have like 5 minutes, I think, each person. So our first chapter that we're looking at is chapter 7, and that is Barb.
Yes. So I loved this chapter. It was for me just the main thing was them deciding what they were to take with them into their new space, and then really what was ended up guiding them in their new direction. I love that part of this chapter. So as they picked the items, just three that they really focused on that they could take with them. And then again, the sharing of members and the story by the longtime member who, just her words really spurred the church on, and it was a gift from God. That the church, they describe how she told them that the church had thrived through four moves and it would continue um, to do that, and to recognize they recognized the old and honored it. And so then talked a bit about the sacred space that is important to all of us, really, and the thin places where we really meet God. But that God is with us in unexpected ways. And the surprise, at the end of the chapter, when I read it, clink, 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 it caught me. That was such a catchy name for a chapter. But then, she described how, the tears were unbidden and really for me unexpected. I was just reading it, and then it started describing that, and it just was very emotional time for them, and the way she can share those thin places that they had in their journey. And it just, this chapter to me just told that very clearly. So just the difficulty of what to take with us and the joy of finding out that it was just perfectly what they needed.
Anything else on that, or and we'll have some time too to review in our groups and our breakout sessions as well. But thank you for sharing that today. And so the next chapter, let's see, gotta find it. There it is. So Chris, you had chapter 8. There you are.
Yes, and chapter 8, the title is Cafetorium Wilderness. Started off with, I'm taking this as an implication that before they actually left their previous building, they spent time in trying out and practicing being in the wild, doing stuff weirdly. For example, doing Bible study in a wine room, Bible study at a Chick-fil-A, local coffee shops, at a grocery store near the deli, doing church stuff in weird spots that started getting some attention from those who looked on, as well as in the wine room, someone, as the group started to pray, jumped in to add someone in their life to the prayer list. They also did church in an Italian place, did ashes to go, and as they practiced this, they found that they were being more fully connected to their community. But as they left their previous building, they started having to deal with the logistics. What stuff can we keep with us, and what do we need to use? What are the requirements of a temporary space, including how much does it cost? So they landed on a elementary cafetorium, so a cafeteria with a stage. And there are those questions of how would people find us? How would they know that they were there? How many people who had been worshiping with them would continue to join them in worship? Also, the logistics of what you do on those special service times of Monday, Thursdays, of Christmas Eves, when you're only able to use the elementary cafetorium on Sundays for 3 hours. But they kept going, and Don uses a quote. I didn't write down who the quote is from, but named that liminal times, so transitional times, are both dangerous, alluring, and sacred. Dangerous with all the stuff that can go wrong, alluring, that newness, that create the possibilities of creativity, but also the sacredness of simply being present. But it wasn't without a struggle. They experienced 2 deaths in the congregation and had to host those memorial services in funeral homes. There is that lacking that was felt. It was tiring and exhausting of always setting up and taking down, all this constant movement without stability. They ended up doing that for 14 months before they were able to move into the new place. And the congregation member, Marlon Fick, named part of this process. He joined them while they were in this transitional time. Most of his life was marked by the places where he lived. Those are what helped define his life, not the people he knew in those places, until he met Connection Christian Church, where it became the people, not the place, that was important. And I felt that to be very powerful to think about.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thank you. So many things moving out of a building and not being in a new building. So thank you for capturing all of that.
I
And
thought about what they wouldn't have learned if they hadn't been in the wilderness.
right. Yeah. It's such an important metaphor biblically for us and spiritually. So, yeah, that was a really important part, I think, of their journey. So thank you for doing that, Chris. And then chapter 9, Cynthia.
Sure. I wanted to mention the scripture related to this chapter, which is on the back of our handout for today. It's Luke 10:25-37. And experts in the law are testing Jesus, and Jesus responds as key in the law, the phrase we're so familiar with: you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And then to answer who is your neighbor, Jesus responds with the parable of the Good Samaritan, concluding that the one who loves a neighbor is not necessarily a religious leader or an expected fine citizen, but one who is generally judged negatively and assumed as inferior. The one who offered practical sympathy is what's used in the translation here. So it's that practical sympathy concept that is important in this chapter. The one who responded to need with practical care and support is the true neighbor to another. So the chapter begins with this acknowledgement of Jesus' call to his followers to direct love outward, and then turns really quickly to focus on the idea that this focus of care extended beyond the walls must be firmly grounded in love for one another for those within the congregation. So Weeks posits that love for one another within the church provides both the anchor for the congregation and internal combustion for moving forward. And so she says that their church loves hard, and she references ways that they embodied this love. Shepherding groups with elders regularly calling and praying with everyone, she says. All adults being invited to participate in one of many adult Bible studies. Really regular and frequent engaging with youth and children. Many active ministry teams, and what she calls over communication, using many methods to share information. And she says the church raised its standard for what it means to be loved by a church. So this included what she mentioned: welcoming gifts, lots of celebrations, ongoing responses to grief, and a lot of listening. So one of the stories I appreciated in this chapter, it's on page 61. This was Richard Bennett, who weekly called, it says, each member of his Sunday school class. And that was the grouping of the oldest members of the congregation. And she talks about how he encouraged them and listened to their concerns and was a cheerleader for the church's transformation. And speaks specifically about how he took folks out to lunch when they seemed troubled and had good conversations with them. So his advocating for the future with those longtime members made a real difference. And it was one of the ways that the church has love, not just with words, but with action within the congregation. The chapter also talks about financial giving as a form of loving. She calls it How Our People Love When No One Else But God Is Looking. She mentions some of the financial challenges they faced, and she talks about borrowing specifically from Disciples Church Extension. She concludes that the church's current debt is manageable and they are in good financial shape. And she notes that's because love makes the difference, loving God, loving each other, and loving the future generations of our church. That love is easy to see. So to summarize, I guess we could say that love in action within the congregation has been the key ingredient. That's the name of the chapter, the key ingredient for this church's breakthrough and transformation.
All right, thank you so much. And then we have one last chapter, chapter 10, and Janet.
Thank you. This chapter is called Y'all Means All, which I don't know if y'all use this phrase up there, but I know down in the South and in Texas, it's used a lot. And this is about moving to becoming an open and affirming congregation. And I thought there was a phrase in our litany that I thought fits so well with this, in that, turning old habits into new hope. Because sometimes I think that within congregations, we find they're not open and affirming, and it's really more of a habit than anything else. And it's very clear that, Joe and Don made it clear from the beginning that, they were going to practice being an open and affirming clergy couple, but that's different from being the clergy of the congregation. And so they asked their elders, what would you expect us to do once in 2015 it was made legal for homosexuals to be married? They were also very clear that they didn't want to go through all of this work of moving and spending time in the wilderness of the cafetorium for the congregation to split when they decide to enter into the open and affirming process. They were clear that there were many people, or a few people at least, within the congregation who were either they knew were gay or queer, as Don refers to them, or had family members. So they may have been open, but not necessarily affirming. That was not a question. And they had the experience that I don't know of, that many churches have, where there's a beloved member who is obviously open and clear about it, and the congregation loves them. And it's an entry point to having a serious conversation about how do we love one another in this way. One of the most important things, and I think that is so endemic, I think, to the disciples of Christ, and here it says, whenever someone would join their church, she and Joe would meet with them and say, you need to know that this is a church where LGBTQ plus people are fully welcomed and affirmed. I don't want you to get involved and be shocked by that. Now, you do not have to agree with same-sex marriage, but we have room for you. Yet we ask you to give dignity and grace to others. It's essential. And I have that same conversation with open LGBTQ plus folks. Before you join, let me tell you that our leadership, including your pastors, are welcoming and affirming of all sexual and gender orientations, but not every single person who comes here is, nor do we ask them to be. We think this is a place for them to be loved and to grow also. But if anyone ever makes you feel unloved, please, we want you to know. Making this a safe space for you is important to us. The other part about this that is not specifically related to being open and affirming was just their use of marketing and advertising. I have a hair on my chin. That when I've worked in nonprofits, I know that one of the ways that we got the word out for various events was to release a press release about anything, release a press release. And there is always a local 24-hour news channel that is always looking for something. And so they sent out press releases and they made a commercial. Not everyone can make a commercial in their local communities because the ad time would be too expensive, but they made a beautiful commercial. And I was really impressed with using these traditional marketing means to get the word out of who they are, where they are, and that you are welcome. And it paid off for them. So I think that's that's something that I think we should all kind of just put away in our head to use in the future for various things that may be coming up. They did vote to become open and affirming, and they remain that way.
Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you being willing to, take some time and do a summary of what you've read in each chapter. And I'm sure we're going to carry some of what you've said into our conversation in our smaller groups. So we are going to break up. Let's see, what time is it? It is 10:22. So we are running a little bit ahead of schedule. We're going to break up into groups, and some of you who are from the same church will be in the same group, and then other group, not all of us have groups here, then we'll be a little more dispersed and diverse. So we'll take some time, and in each of your groups, one of the leaders, one of us will be there to kind of help get your group going. We do want for each group to have a spokesperson to come back when we reconvene and share your thoughts with us today. So I think, is there anything else I need to say, Bill or Marvin, or did I capture it?
Might take a few minutes in your breakout group to be sure that everybody knows each other and where they're from.
Okay. Yeah. No time of intro. So I think Robin is gonna hit the magic button and off we go.
in between time for your congregation. And we talked about being in between death and resurrection. And then we talked about not knowing what will happen next, which is just an aspect of life. And then some discussion around wilderness and what is wilderness for our churches. And we talked about the wilderness that Dawn and her church went into by going into like the Italian restaurant and these other secular settings is moving into a wilderness experience. And I thought about our Narcotics Anonymous groups in their wilderness of addiction, and the hope that they might start coming to our worship service, or some of them anyway. And we talked about Good Samaritan, what love is, and what does loving each other look like in your congregation. And I spoke about the book Art of Pastoring and creating a loving environment that has all the loving aspects of a good home, and how that is foundational. And Marcy talked about loving people that she disagrees with, and there are people in the congregation that she does disagree with, but she's been able to maintain a loving relationship with them. And then we ended by talking about different aspects of welcoming people.
Anything you want to add, Marcy? Nope. Okay. All right. Well, it sounds like there was rich and varied discussions among the groups. Any comments from anybody in general about the breakout experience or what you heard from the other groups? Any thoughts come to mind? Okay. Well, I hope it was a meaningful time to be in discussion with others from other churches who were dealing with a lot of the same issues that seem to be common among disciples' congregations, particularly here in the Northern Lights region. Not to exclude you, Janet, because I'm sure it's not much different in your region as well. So we're fortunately just a couple minutes ahead. So I'm going to ask Marvin to talk a little bit about what we're looking at for next week, so you have an idea of what's going to be going on in session 4.
Okay, thank you, Bill. First off, mark on your calendar that we're meeting at 10:30 rather than at 10 o'clock next week. We have a 2-hour difference with Dawn's week's time, and she has a Bible study that she does at her time between noon and 1 o'clock. So we've negotiated with her to join us at let's see, this is 11:00. We've had a dickens of a time on the planning committee trying to get this straightened out because of the difference in time. But anyway, just be here at 10:30, and she's going to join us. She's going to join us, I believe, at 11:05 and be with us till noon. And that's, of course, don't worry about her time. So we'll have the hour and a half, but we'll just start 30 minutes later. And she will be with us. She's going to, first off, as it is now, she's going to respond to our questions. So we have no questions in the hopper yet. So if you want to form a question, it'd be helpful to take a moment or two today or before you forget it, and put down your questions and send them to me, and then we'll get them to her ahead of time so that she can respond. We will not tell her who's writing the questions. We'll just send the questions, because the important thing is the questions, to have an opportunity to ask her, well, what about this? Or you said this and happened in relationship to that. I'd like to know a little more about it. If you have those kind of questions, here's a wonderful opportunity to have that kind of dialogue with her. Then she's going to talk about what's happened since the writing of the book, and that'll be an interesting part of our experience. She may tell us about what some churches have done in the use of the book in a study session in their own congregation. And then she has created a series of principles that have emerged from all of this, both the book and the reaction to the book and the study groups. And she's prepared to share with us those principles about going forward. So that's kind of what she's outlined for us, and we're looking forward to that. Because she's coming at our 4th session, then we're scheduling a 5th session the following Wednesday, the regular time, when we will conclude the last 4 chapters. And hopefully in that time, with the breakout rooms, we may even put the congregation separately from others, so that you, as a 4 or 5 people from a congregation, can talk specifically about the next steps for your congregation. And those of us that represent only one congregation can be grouped, we hope, in a way that we can talk about how we will go forward. So that's kind of how we're planning on ending it. We're also going to have a 1-page evaluation that we would invite everybody to respond to. Since this is an experiment, we want to learn best from what we did well, and we also want to learn how we can do it better. Back to you, Bill.
Questions or comments about next week? Or
So we just send our question into Marvin by email?
Yes, and today or tomorrow would be most helpful, because we want to get them to her right after Sunday, and get that going. Yeah, I think you have my email address with some of the stuff we send out. If you don't, it's in the regional directory.
if you don't, you've been living in a cave, because Marvin's been sending out a lot of emails, and that's great. Thank you, Marvin.
Well, Robin's our administrator who keeps the traffic going in the right direction. By the way, the recording on last session's was needed to be refreshed. If you tried to get the recording from last time, sometimes it didn't work. It's now working. Thanks, Robin.
Okay, thanks. All right. Well, I'm going to close this with a word of prayer, and look forward to seeing everybody again next week. And hopefully some of the ones that were not able to be here today will be able to join us next week. So let's just be in an attitude of prayer. Take a couple of deep breaths, because it's been a full morning. Ever faithful Creator, we are so grateful to you for this opportunity and for the technology that allows us to be able to meet together from all these disparate places as a group together. We're grateful for that, and we're grateful for the work of Dawn and Joe Weeks that provides a catalyst for us to have these rich discussions about what is going on in our individual congregations, and about what we might be able to do as the future unfolds before us, to be about the business of building your kingdom here and now. We pray for guidance, continued guidance from your Spirit as we do move forward in this study and in our congregations and in our lives. We give you thanks for Marvin and his guidance and his wisdom as he's brought this study together in such a meaningful way. Continue to bless and watch over him, as I ask you to continue to bless and watch over each one here and the individual congregations that we represent. Thank you again for this time together. Bless us as we go our separate ways, and bring us back safely, at least virtually, next week. I pray all this in the name of the one whom we worship, Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Peace, everyone. So, Robin and Rochelle,